Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. I am John Keir. I am one of your co-hosts, and joining me as always is our other co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It's Season 3, Episode 62. The Pittsburgh Steelers at 8-5-1 traveled to New Orleans to take on the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have been a fantastic team all year long, coming off a shocking Week 1 defeat to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've lost only one time since then, so there's certainly a lot to get to with this game. It's a big game for both teams. The Saints actually have not clinched a first-round bye, I believe. I believe we were going through that, Austin. They still need to win one of their last two games, or they don't need to. They would need the Rams to lose one of their last two, but looking at their schedule, it's most likely going to take the Saints winning one of their last two.
Yeah, it's not going to be. It's going to be hard for them to lose it. They could definitely win one of their last two.
And as we know, the Steelers certainly have a lot on the line in this game. They with the Chargers playing the Ravens on Saturday, and we'll get into that game a bit later. If the Ravens win, the Steelers need to win again, just like last week, to stay ahead of them. And with the Colts and Titans playing the way they have recently, it's certainly not a guarantee the Steelers make the playoffs. So this game is very, very important for them still. So it's not like, last week was a big win, but let me ask you, it was such a momentous win, but if the Steelers don't make the playoffs this year, how quickly do we forget about that win in the grand scheme of things?
Oh, very quickly. It would mean nothing if they can't make the playoffs.
I would agree with you. So, the Saints, with a point differential of 167 and a 12-2 record, are both the best in the league. And they've only lost once at home, obviously, in the first week of the season. So this is a huge game. So, an interesting bit of news and notes that came up earlier a couple days ago was defensive lineman Cameron Jordan kind of had an interesting comment when it came to Ben Roethlisberger. He was asked if he was a future Hall of Famer in his mind, and he listed, I forget exactly what it was, but essentially he said that Ben Roethlisberger was not on his top 5 quarterbacks list from this most recent era, kind of spanning from the Peyton Mannings, the Tom Brady's, up until the Aaron Rodgers, and up until the new quarterbacks of today's age like Russell Wilson. So I personally think this is a little overblown, but at the same time, I can understand why he kind of backtracked on it and why it was kind of blown up, because it was kind of a quiet week going in to this game, and it's kind of bulletin board material, even if I kind of think it was overblown. But that's how it works, and you don't usually want to give your opponent any ammunition, but the Steelers seem to, or at least Ben Roethlisberger seems to have taken the high road. But I guess, what do you think about all this?
I was so salty that he put Eli Manning in front of Ben Roethlisberger. It's like, what are you doing, baby? What is you doing? What, you need a drug test. Have you not seen Eli Manning play the past 2 seasons? But yeah, that was it.
I mean, it rubbed me the wrong way at first, but, the more I thought about it, it kind of makes sense when you think about it from what he's seen, because you think about it, he's probably thinking more so NFC quarterbacks. Obviously there's Brady and Manning, they're going to be on that list, and then Drew Brees for sure, and you think about guys that he's probably seen more often, like an Eli Manning, so he probably has more to draw from there. He's only seen Ben Roethlisberger and played against him, I believe, once in the preseason and once in the regular season. But regardless, I think this is something that's being blown up because it's a middle-of-the-week story that people feel the need to talk about leading up to the game. All right, so let's look at the injury reports, Austin. How are we looking on both teams here?
Well, for the Saints, they only have one guy with a designation. That's Jermon Bushrod. He had been filling in for Teron Armstead. He is out with a hamstring injury, but it's also worth noting that 4 of the Saints' starting 5 offensive linemen were on the injury report this week. That would be center Max Unger with a concussion. Andres Pete had a shoulder injury. Ryan Ramczyk had a shoulder injury as well. And Teron Armstead had a pectoral injury that he's been out with, and then had an added knee injury. but all of them practice on full on Friday and don't have injury designations. For the Steelers, James Conner is out. That really wasn't a big surprise. Didn't seem like he was ready coming into the week. He didn't log any practice during the week. And then a surprise one on Thursday, Juju Smith-Schuster got hurt with a groin injury, and he did not practice on Friday. He is officially questionable, and Antonio Brown and James Washington together said that they think he'll play. But we don't really know. It doesn't look good. He didn't practice Friday. I mean, maybe it was just to rest him and make sure he was okay, but no practice to me is a bad sign. But we'll see what happens.
All right, so a little information about the Steelers and Saints. The Saints have won the last two games, both a game in Pittsburgh and a game in New Orleans. The most recent game coming in a 35-32 victory for the Saints in Pittsburgh back in 2014. The Steelers fell behind early, and they scored, I believe, a touchdown in like the closing seconds to make it close, but that game was not as close as the score indicated, I remember. Obviously, being a non-conference opponent, the Steelers have never played the Saints in the Super Bowl, and we didn't have a fun fact really, but I guess we'll rip more on what Austin wanted to talk about with Marcus Colston later. But I remember the last time the Steelers played in New Orleans, it was a 22-10. It was a 22-10 loss in 2010. Kind of interesting there for the Saints, and I remember watching that game on Halloween, and I was always frustrated on a personal note because my favorite player, Antoine Randall, had a touchdown taken away after a review. It was the correct call, but I was always frustrated with that because that would have been his final NFL touchdown, so I'll always be frustrated about that. But not really anything special to come up with today, but I guess let's get into the game right now. So let's look at this game starting on offense. So there's a lot of different ways we could go here, and I think the only thing we really need to mention to kind of get things kicked off is that the Saints defense has really rounded into form the last few weeks. Since November 4th, and you might remember that game, a 45-35 victory over the Los Angeles Rams, the Saints haven't given up more than 17 points in a game since then. That's really intimidating when you look at that on the surface. They have played some bad teams. They've played the Buccaneers. They yielded just 9 points to the Panthers last week, and the Bengals, and they crushed the Eagles. They beat the Falcons on Thanksgiving. So there's some good opponents. There's some not so good opponents. But either way, giving up no more than 17 points in a stretch of this many games is pretty hard to do today. So how do the Steelers stack up against them here?
Well, really on offense, I feel like the Steelers are actually, it's funny, I think the Steelers and Saints are very close, similar teams. I mean, you both got good offensive lines. You both got a Hall of Fame quarterback. You both got at least one good wide receiver. I mean, the Steelers differ because they have two. And then you got a solid tight end in like Benjamin Watson and Vance McDonald. So I feel like they're very similar. But I feel like the Steelers are better than I could definitely say they're better than the Bengals when the Saints versed them. Because I mean the Bengals were messed up. I mean they still had Andy Dalton, but they've been an injured team the whole year. Then with the Rams, I would say that they're not as good. But I mean the Rams are trending downwards. So I mean now I would say the Steelers have a better offense than the Rams. But at the point where the Saints versed the Rams, that was not true. So it's somewhere in between. Like I feel like the Steelers could be that team to break the 17-point thing. And in fact, I actually do think they're going to be that team. But it's going to be hard for them to put up 35 on this defense. This defense has really come alive. And Jesse on the other podcast that was done before this, the Saints Insider, he focused on Demario Davis on their defense, and I feel like he has really turned it up the past few games. I mean, obviously he was big in early season. He got 2 sacks on Eli Manning, and he just got a sack last game against Cam Newton. But I feel like him, and then the Saints have Eli Apple now, and I know you said it. I also scoffed at them when they traded for Eli Apple because I didn't think he was a good player. I did say, I don't remember if I said it on the podcast, and if I didn't, I don't remember who I said it to, but I did say well, knowing that the Giants staff, they were just inept and not working with him right. And that's looking what happened, because he's been like a shutdown one of the past 2 weeks at least, and he's been pretty solid since coming over. I mean, teams still try attacking him, which is surprising to me, because I feel like their other cornerbacks are not as good, but just crazy. It's just getting back to the point at hand, though, I feel like the Steelers have a harder challenge than the past teams. So, like, stacking up wise, like, I do think the Steelers could go over 17 points, unlike the other teams that they versed, like the Eagles and such, since November 4th. But it's going to be rough because this defense is really shaped into form, like you said. How do you think the Steelers stack up?
Well, I mean, I think they stack up better than most teams, but it's still going to be very tough. I mean, like, let's just look kind of level by level at the Saints here, and their front four is talented. Alex Okafor, Sheldon Rankins, Cameron Jordan, all three of those guys are standouts in their own right. And don't forget they have Marcus Davenport, the first-round pick that they traded up for. He's been very good too. And, the fact that Cameron Jordan's been so good, and I think I remember Jesse was talking about, Jesse Cardinal, who I had on the show before, he was talking about Cameron Jordan's ability to rush the passer and kind of stop the run. He's a dual threat guy, and that's really such an important aspect of a player at his position. Usually you see the great players are pass rushers, but it's such an added bonus when they can be a good run stopper too. And his ability as a pass rusher opens up a lot of other chances for guys like Alex Okafor and Sheldon Rankins. And Rankins has been really good as well. I think personally, the matchup I'm most looking forward to on the offensive line is going to be David DeCastro against Sheldon Rankins. And this is an athletic group, and they're also a powerful group. So I don't know. We know the Steelers, most of their success running the football has their offensive linemen on the move, because we know the one true weakness for the Steelers offensive line is kind of manning up mano a mano on these guys, because they're strong players, obviously, but they're not big, maulers. They're more the athletic, get the guys out in space kind of offensive linemen. So if you're running the ball, do you try running the ball to the outside with these athletic defensive linemen, or do you take your chances just trying to stuff it up the middle? It's kind of tough, because I think you might want to try to take your chances up the middle, but as we know, we saw last week, Jalen Samuels is more of a off-tackle kind of guy. You want to get him in space. You don't want to have him just pounding it up the middle.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is, I think obviously it should be like a mix, but I feel like they still should try running to the outside, even though the Saints' outside defensive players are versatile and athletic. I feel like, how do I put this? I feel like Jalen Samuels, I mean, we haven't really seen enough on him, but I feel like he can handle the job. I feel like we have to at least try and see. Because, I mean, the Saints are hard to run against, but they're not as hard to run against as their stats say. It's just like when we talked about the Patriots last week, where the Patriots have a pretty good offensive line, but not where their stats say. For the Saints, you had so many games where the Saints just went up on teams just immediately, like went down their throat, especially in the beginning of the season, where they got to verse like teams like Cincinnati, and they won that game like a ridiculous number, like 40-12. I don't remember the exact number, but that forces teams to throw. If they want to get back in the game, they got to throw. When you're down by 20 points, you got to throw, because you're running out of time if you're down by 20 points. And so I do think, because don't take this as me disrespecting the Saints defensive line, because Sheldon Rankins is playing out of his mind this year. I did not see that coming. Sheldon Rankins is doing absolutely great. Cameron Jordan is always good. I feel like this isn't his best season, but I feel like he's still playing at an elite level. So then I like Onyemata. I like Marcus Davenport. Davenport has, in limited playing time, has 4 sacks, and just all pretty good players. But I could even be sold on them still being the number one rushing defense in terms of yards per game. I feel like the stats are I feel like the Steelers get a little bit out of them, because I feel like the Steelers, unlike a lot of other teams, have the capability of keeping up with the Saints. And if the Steelers can keep up with the Saints, they should be able to run the ball a little more effectively than other teams have this year because other teams have gone down so quick. I mean, obviously, if the Saints just come out like the Chiefs and go 21-0 on the Steelers, yeah, the run game isn't going to happen. It's just they're not going to be able to run to the outside and even try that at all. But I feel like the Steelers are going to be able to run here. I feel like that's a key. I feel like the Steelers are going to need to establish a run game to get it to actually win this game. If they're going to try and win, they're going to have that run game there because you see in losses, the teams that lose to the Saints, I mean, it's a lot of them. There's 12 of them. You see they don't have a lot of rushing yards, most of them. I feel in the 2 wins, I mean, the Buccaneers didn't have a lot of rushing yards, but oh no. Who's the other team to beat the Saints?
The Cowboys.
Why am I like, it's who?
The Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, it's the Cowboys. Yeah, the Cowboys ran with Zeke all day. I mean, it wasn't Zeke that won the game. But well, that really hurts. I felt like I had a better point there, but I still gonna hold that true. I think that the reason teams haven't been able to beat the Saints is because they haven't had a good enough run game against them because they've been going down. But that's what I think. I think the run is very important this week.
Well, what's the magic number for yards then, as far as rushing yards? Like, if the Steelers are going to win, they're going to need how many rushing yards?
It's a little unrealistic, but probably 110.
110. See, I don't think seeing the way the Steelers played, like against the Broncos, and how they played at times, I don't see them even trying to run the ball a lot. I think they're just going to keep trying to do these short passes, and they'll try to take advantage of what the defense gives them. I think they'll run the ball a few times, but to be honest with you, I'd be shocked if the Steelers had more than 20 designed runs in this game. And normally I'd want them to have more, but I don't. I know what you mean where the Saints' run defense might be a little, I guess, deflated, I guess would be the right term, because their number is a little lower because teams have been throwing the ball so much because they've been losing against the Saints so much this year. They're still very good, and Demario Davis has been fantastic. The whole defense has been very good, and I'm not as sold that the Steelers are going to be able to run the ball. I think maybe 60 yards is about what I'm expecting this week. I think it's really going to have to come from the passing game, and we've seen them improve throughout the season. We already talked a little bit about Eli Apple. We saw good contributions from a bunch of different guys in the passing game last week. It's going to take that and more, but who do you really have your eyes on for the Steelers passing game?
For the Steelers passing game, I'm looking at Eli Rogers again. I feel like Rogers came out hot last week. I mean, he immediately had like a big third down conversion. And with Juju down, I mean, he's like, him and Ryan Switzer are going to be the slot receivers. I feel like they're going to be important because, again, likely Antonio Brown is going to get double teamed like normal. Now we might not have Juju Smith-Schuster, and that's just going to like encourage that Antonio Brown being locked up and then just let someone else beat them. So I'm looking at Eli Rogers and Ryan Switzer out of the slot to make a difference. I'm not as confident in James Washington. I mean, James Washington definitely had a turnaround last week. You can't call it a turnaround because I don't think he's going to keep it up this game. I feel like it was just a one-game thing for now. I'm not saying like that James Washington is going to completely fail for the rest of the year, but I feel like he's not going to repeat that in back-to-back games, especially against these guys. I feel like the Saints swarm to the ball and swarm to the catch point, and that's a problem for James Washington. When James Washington in college and what we saw in preseason, what we saw last week, wins a lot of his battles in jump balls and going up for it. And I feel like the Saints are really good to combat that. Who are you looking at as a receiving option?
See, I actually think James Washington is going to have a pretty good day, especially with Smith-Schuster possibly being slowed down. He's facing a tall corner in Eli Apple, I would imagine, assuming he plays, and you have Brown likely getting bracketed. I think this is the kind of game where, especially after last week's big performance, I think Washington is going to need to have a big one, and obviously the slot receivers are going to need to be good. It's tough. You really need to be careful, too, when it comes to this Saints secondary. they're ball hawks. I mean, they take the ball away, and I'm sure you remember Von Bell's strip of DJ Moore last week. I'm not feeling great about it. And as far as Ben Roethlisberger goes, I mean, I think it's going to take him throwing the ball. Like, I feel like he's going to drop back 50, 60 times and just hurl it around. I don't know if the Steelers win the game that way. I think that might be the only way they can, though. I mean, I know you talked about the Steelers running the ball, but I don't see how the Steelers can manage to win by doing that. I mean, they can if they do it, but I just don't see them doing that.
See, the problem is that you're probably right. The game. That's why I think. I guess the spoiler. That's why I think the Steelers are going to lose. I think the fact that they're going to be forced to throw, like all the other teams that have lost to the Saints, it's gonna be why they lose, because they're not going to be able to run. That's why I think running is important, because I think if they can run, I think that's going to mean the Steelers win, if that makes sense. I feel like doing what the Steelers normally do is going to mean that they lose, because in a shootout with Drew Brees, I think it's not a good idea. Like Jesse Cardinal said, just in a shootout, the Saints are probably going to win it.
And make no mistake about it, the Steelers' offense needs to score early. You take the ball if you're the Steelers and winning the toss like you did last week?
I'm sorry, say that again?
If you win the coin toss like you did last week, are you taking the ball again?
I'm 100% taking the ball. I 100% want the Steelers to be aggressive and play it like it's the Patriots again. Play it like it's an old enemy. I want them to take the ball and try and smack the Saints as hard as they can. What do you think?
I think you have to too. If you go down 7 points, you aren't going to lose, but it's so much hard. That hill gets so much harder to climb. If you go down 14 points, the game is as good as over. I mean, you have to be able to get up on this team early, and that's the thing that's interesting. We'll talk about it with the defense in a minute, but the offense has to play like a ball control offense against a team that doesn't let you run the ball, and you can't throw the ball a ton on them because they take the ball away. This is really, I don't know. I think the Ravens have the best overall defense, but right now this is probably the hottest defense in the NFL. Would you agree with me?
I'm going to say no. Not the hottest, but definitely up there. So it's more ticky-tacky than anything. It's more the language, because I'm going to say the Bears are the hottest defense in the league right now. But I would say the Saints are definitely playing up there. The Saints are definitely I would say top three hottest defenses, and because they're playing angry. They play like they're being disrespected, and they're not. But they play that way. And you already referenced it. The Von Bell forced fumble on DJ Moore last week was something else. Like he punched it like exactly where it needed to be, and they want to force those fumbles. Like, I mean, obviously every team wants to, but they look hungry. Their defense looks hungry, and that's what makes them a hot defense.
I see what you're saying, but I go back to that 17 points against that magic number thing, and I just don't see how that's the hottest defense in the NFL to me if you can do that for 7 weeks. But I guess at the end of the day, when it comes to the offense, I mean, what kind of number? What are they going to need to have? They're going to need to have a advantage in time of possession. They're going to have to be great on third down. They're going to need to be darn near perfect, if not perfect, in the red zone. You certainly can't win this game with 2 turnovers this time. I mean, you have to play about as close to a perfect game as you could possibly play. I think there's very little wiggle room here, and I think even if you play perfect, I think the Steelers are lucky to crack 30 points. I think the Steelers need to – I think a realistic number is like 24 points.
Yeah, that seems realistic. I feel like a magic number for turnovers at least has got to be 1. I feel like you get 1 mistake and that's it, because last week the Steelers were able to just edge out the Patriots with 2, and this was like a failing Patriots team. This team wasn't very good. It's not one of the top Patriots teams. They're being written off pretty hard right now because of that loss and losing 2 weeks in a row. But the Saints aren't like that. The Saints are a team that, I mean, I guess you could say the offense has trended downwards in the past 4 weeks or so, but their defense is just insane. So and it's going to keep them in the game. So really, the whole offense can only be allotted one turnover, if that. Probably, it's going to be interesting to see what happens if the Steelers have one turnover. That might be it. They might not even be allowed to have one turnover, but that's what I'm going to put it at for now. Then they got to win the penalty battle against a very hard crew. Crew being referees, I mean. They got to keep up what they've been doing there. Then really the offense isn't the problem with that, but still, I mean, David DeCastro got a call last week, he's only got 3 on the season, so definitely got to keep that down as low as possible. Then I'm thinking touchdown wise, if you were to tell me the Steelers to guess how many touchdowns the Steelers got in a win. Ooh, that one's rough because you think of the Saints' defense, and you really got to think. Because in my mind, I want to say 5, but 5 is not realistic at all. It's just against this defense, it's really not. But so I guess it's definitely going to take at least 3 touchdowns. It's going to take at least 3, and that worries me because I think that the Saints aren't going to give up that much, and I don't want to rely on Chris Boswell to kick field goals to keep up with Drew Brees and Will Lutz and those guys. So, I feel like those are some of the key numbers, and I'm thinking about, the over and unders for what it will take to win.
Last question about the offense. How are you feeling about the offensive line real quick?
In terms of the offensive line, I feel pretty good. There's not in my mind, the Steelers have the best offensive line in the league. Maybe that's not true, but we've seen the offensive line completely nullify a hot Bengals defensive line coming in. Geno Atkins had 6.5 sacks and all that coming in. It was very early on in the season, and they gave up 0 sacks. And there was only 2 quarterback hits in the next game. Against the Atlanta Falcons, next game, 0 sacks. Just I feel like the offensive line is just one of the best in the league. I'm never going to worry about a defensive line, no matter how talented, no matter who you throw at us, whether it be Cameron Jordan, Onyemata, Marcus Davenport, and all these guys. It's never gonna make me worried. I feel like the offensive line is always going to perform good enough where the Steelers won't lose based on their play.
I'm certainly feeling better about them in pass protection than I do against the run. I think this will be a tough one in the ground game, especially seeing as how they struggled against the Raiders. Just as a team, you go back through the games, Falcons, no sacks against. Bengals, no sacks against. You got the Browns, they had 1 sack, the second Browns game, that is. That being from Myles Garrett. And then the second game against the Ravens, 1 sack, which you remember was intentionally taken to kill time. 1 sack against the Broncos. You got 2 sacks last week. One of them was a blown assignment on Jalen Samuels, and the other was a coverage sack. So I feel good about this offensive line. And, there's 3 Pro Bowlers on it for a reason. They might not be as well known as the Saints offensive line, but I think that they're pretty good. Let's jump to the other side of the football. This is a rough turnout, it looks like, for the Steelers defense. For the Steelers defense. Yeah, the Saints offense hasn't been great the past few weeks, only putting up 12, and I say only, 28 against the Buccaneers. That was a relatively unimpressive win based on what the Saints have done this year, and then 10 points against the Cowboys. The last 3 weeks they haven't been great, but they also haven't been home. So they're coming back home where they're averaging a ridiculous, I think it's well over 30 points a game. So, even though they haven't played well, they're coming home. I don't feel great about it. But the one thing that you probably would feel good about is you talked about it, the injuries along the Saints offensive line. You got 4 guys that were on the injury report, and yes, a lot of them are back and they don't have an injury designation, but they're definitely not at 100%. So that's got to be the only advantage I can think of when it comes to the Steelers defense, is their defensive line maybe having kind of a stalemate against a banged-up offensive line.
I just don't feel good. I feel like it's really unfortunate that Teron Armstead was able to make it back this week. Because if they were out, if he wasn't ready with his torn pec, they would have probably had to start Derek Newton, who hasn't played since sometime last year, where he tore both of his patellar tendons, and that would have been the best case scenario for the Steelers, because Bushrod's out. Bushrod's been playing for Armstead there, but Teron Armstead has probably played as the best offensive tackle in the league this year. I'll say it that way, because Teron Armstead has absolutely been playing lights out when he has played. I mean, he's coming off a torn pec coming back into this game, but obviously he made the Pro Bowl, so he's doing something right. But then they're so strong, even with their injuries. Like, I loved Ryan Ramczyk coming out last year. I thought he was a great pick. I didn't think he was going to make it that far in the draft when he got picked, and he's playing at a high level. You got Max Unger, who probably their weakest offensive lineman, maybe. He still made the Pro Bowl, which is the problem. But, like, I don't know. I felt like he was wrongly voted to the Pro Bowl. I felt like he was looked at a little too high. But, like, everyone else is just super incredible on their offensive line. They might be the best. I mean, I will still say the Steelers are the best, but they're definitely up there. And it's going to be really rough when, like, the Steelers' pass rush is sort of inconsistent. Well, really the players that are pass rushing. It's just, like, T.J. Watt last week was showing pressure like he hasn't shown in, like, 3 weeks. He's doing incredible, and he got that one sack. He got the only sack for the Steelers, but I don't feel good. Like, Bud Dupree on the other side, that doesn't make me feel good. Cameron Hayward hasn't really been able to turn pressure into sacks, and then Stephon Tuitt hasn't really gotten that many sacks. So, I mean, they're both doing good pressure-wise, I feel like, Hayward and Tuitt. But then Javon Hargrave has absolutely been a beast and has, like, 6.5 sacks on the year. But I'm just not really feeling good. Like, I feel like up the middle, because I don't think as highly of Max Unger as I guess everyone else does, I feel like that's the best place, because Javon Hargrave, he didn't get a sack last week, obviously. Steelers only had one, but he's been hot with that. I feel like Vince and on inside linebacker, blitzes might be good here, but I'm not feeling too confident, especially after only getting one sack last week against, well, statistically not as good of an offensive line as the Saints, when the Saints are, like, tied for the best. So it's going to be hard. You could definitely tell me that the Steelers get only one sack this game. I might even believe you if you said 0, because it's very hard to get that kind of stat here. I do think they'll get pressure. I think the pressure isn't the problem. I think it's being able to turn that pressure into a loss of yardage for the Saints.
See, I actually think Cam Hayward has the most advantageous matchup. The left tackle, left guard, and center are all coming off injuries. And I know Unger has the concussion, but Pete and Armstead, those are the guys that are coming off injuries, and Armstead has the pec and knee injury. So that's the guy I really think Hayward should like his matchup regardless. And I'm not saying he's going to necessarily win it, but I feel best about him. Everyone else, I'm not feeling great. I think it's at best a stalemate. We've seen the Steelers be susceptible at times to the run this year, and the offensive lines they've played haven't always been great. Now, I personally think the linebackers haven't been great behind them at times, but I think when it comes to rushing the passer, I guess, where do we want to go from here? Do we want to talk about how well the Saints run the ball and how you want to stop that? Or do you want to talk about how the Steelers can try to rush the passer?
Let's talk about the Saints' great run game.
Okay, so obviously with Kamara and Ingram, Jesse talked about how good both of them are, and they can do, they both weigh the same. They're different kinds of running backs, but they're versatile enough where they can do what the other running back does well enough. So, Ingram you think of as more of a power guy, but he can get to the edge, and Kamara you can think of a guy that can run to the edges, but he can also plow it up the middle too, and they can both catch the ball, Kamara especially. And we talked about that offensive line already. How do the Steelers even go about trying to stop this? I mean, we know that Michael Thomas is really their only big-time receiving threat. Do you try crowding the box?
No, that is asking to lose, because even if you crowd the box, they are going to use one of their guys that are unknown to beat you, if not Michael Thomas. I think one of the biggest things, though, that surprised me when listening to the interview with Jesse was that Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram are the same size. Like, I never thought that. I thought Kamara would be smaller because he was used more as a scat back and because Mark Ingram is used as, like, the trucker guy. That was one of the biggest surprises when listening to that. But there's not a lot of answers. There's not a good answer to say how do the Steelers stop the run game, because really the answer is you don't. Because if you stop the run game, if you put all your effort into stopping the run game, it's going to mean that the Steelers are getting dunked on by Drew Brees and Michael Thomas. I think that the best thing you could do is you gotta leave the wide receivers on one-on-one situations and try and get the most guys at the box you can. I feel like Joe Hayden against Michael Thomas and just having shadow him the whole day, that's going to be one of the answers, or try to be one of the answers, because if you're putting double coverage on Michael Thomas, you're shooting yourself against the run game. And then I feel like you just got to let Mike Hilton and Cody Sensabaugh work the other receivers like Kirkwood and Tommy Lee Lewis and those guys. It's so hard for me to come up with like an idea for how, because you look at it one way and it's like if the Steelers commit to this, if the Steelers commit to one-on-one on all the wide receivers, they're probably going to get beat there because Michael Thomas's catch rate is insane. But then if you put more coverage on the receivers, the Steelers' defense has been very susceptible to the run already, and you're basically going to let them run all over you. We saw it in a very limited snap last week when James White rushed and Sonny Michel rushed and Rex Burkhead rushed. They were going. They were able to get these big gains, and a lot of them. The Patriots got away from the run game. So like I feel like there is no real answer to stopping. It's basically either or. Which one do the Steelers prefer to not let happen? Do the Steelers want to get rushed all over, or do the Steelers want to get passed all over? Because you're really because of my faith in the Steelers defense after last week isn't really much higher. I mean, it's a little higher because it was a pretty good win, but Steelers got bailed out a few times last week. There was drops, there was penalties that we're not used to. It's not going to happen with this team. This team doesn't have guys that really drop the ball. Like, you have Michael Thomas with the highest catch rate in NFL history right now. He's heading towards it. Like, it's not going to happen. They're not going to get bailed out. So, I don't know. What do you think is the game plan for stopping the running backs?
Well, I mean, like you said, you really don't. But just to sum it up, really the only thing you can do is, because the Saints are such a run-heavy team, they're at their best when they're running and not throwing the ball a ton like they used to do with Drew Brees, is you just have to stack the box. There's no other way about it. You have to stack the box, bracket Michael Thomas, and pray. That's about all you can do. I mean, that probably won't even work most of this game. I mean, we've seen the Steelers do that. They did that against the Broncos, and Phillip Lindsay still had a big day. It's going to take big efforts from their defensive line to win the battles, and I think they can at times. I'm not confident they'll be great enough. I'm worried about the linebackers filling in, and I'm certainly worried about the way the Steelers have tackled, maybe not last week, but we've seen the secondary struggle for good portions of the last few weeks. So I'm worried about it, but you've got to declare something. You got to do something. And with the way Drew Brees has played the last couple of years, he's been worse, which is funny because he's really not that bad at all. He's kind of good, in case you didn't know. You want him to beat you, which is kind of crazy to say. Good luck, I guess. This is difficult. And you know what else is tough is he has the fastest release of any quarterback in the NFL. So let me ask you, if you're Keith Butler, how do you try to pressure him?
This is going to sound weird, but I think you got to use Bud Dupree. I think because of how fast Drew Brees gets the ball off, you're going to have to use a stunt and use Dupree because he's the fastest. If you can get Dupree somehow off of a stunt, throw off their offensive line, he can get there. But he's the only linebacker that's fast enough that I think could do that. I'm not saying that T.J. Watt can't hit home and get a sack here, but Bud Dupree, as weird as it sounds, I feel like has the best chance with these stunts because of his speed, because he can get to Drew Brees fast enough before Brees can throw it. But it's going to be hard. Keith Butler's going to have to do what he normally does and dial up some blitzes, and I guess everyone else is just going to have to hope and pray that works out. What do you think?
I actually think you don't blitz almost at all in this game. I think blitzing is a sin. I think that's an automatic loss. If you blitzing Drew Brees is a waste of time because like I said, he has the fastest release in the NFL. Blitzing him is just getting your guys on the back end, just getting them whipped. If you want to blitz, make sure you do it in stunts. You bring a defensive back. Try to do something to disguise. The defensive game plan is going to have to be similar as far as disguising like last week. And it occurred to me, you realize L.J. Fort only played 3 snaps last week.
Yeah, I didn't remember seeing him. I didn't know he only played 3 snaps.
Do you know why Vince Williams became the 3-down linebacker?
What?
Vince Williams became like the linebacker that never came off the field. Do you know why?
Why?
It's because he's the best communicator. And we've talked about communication breakdowns in this defense. What the Steelers were doing, and this was part of why the long touchdown was given up to Chris Hogan. You know how Tom Brady loves to change the play at the line of scrimmage right before he snaps the ball, right? Well, the Steelers were also changing plays. They gave Tom Brady a look, but they also didn't want to give him that same look as soon as he diagnosed it because, Tom Brady's going to find out what you're doing most likely. They're going to have to do the same thing this week. They're going to have to be able to change their plays because obviously, Drew Brees is going to find out what you're doing. You have to be able to disguise things well, and I thought the Steelers did a good job of that last week, but I think the importance of having a guy like Vince Williams, who's your best communicator, your defensive play caller out there, I think that's very important. And although he's not the best in pass coverage, I think I'm willing to accept that instead of having L.J. Fort on the field, who is a better athlete, but not as good a communicator. What say you?
I do think Vince Williams is the move this week again because, like you said, the communication last week was stellar, and it did keep Brady confused. And the announcers were even saying that. The announcers were saying Tom Brady just couldn't get a read on what was happening, even with the motion men going out. But I feel like it should probably be the same this week. I mean, even though L.J. Ford is probably the better coverage linebacker, but I think that actually having John Bostic in there and Vince Williams being like the 3-down linebacker the whole time is more important because, first of all, John Bostic's a better run stopper, and the Saints are a very good running team. So I feel like having John Bostic and Vince Williams in there is the best idea.
So at the end of the day, the Steelers are definitely going to need like a turnover, probably 2, to win this game on defense. What's the magic? I guess we already said the magic number is going to have to be something like 20-something points to keep the Saints under. And I don't know how you do it, but what's it going to take for them to come out with a winning performance?
I feel like it's going to take at least 1 turnover. It's not realistic to say that they're going to get one. It's not realistic to think that. I just think that to pull out a win in this game, the ball's got to be taken away from Drew Brees somehow because even though their offense has stuttered like the past 4 weeks, it hasn't been putting up huge numbers like we saw a few weeks ago where they're putting up like 40 in every game and stuff. But I feel like it's going to take a turnover so that the offense can get one more shot than the Saints do. And I think that's going to be the difference in this game. What do you think?
I think it's going to take 2, and it's going to have to take them being a lot better in the red zone. The Steelers' defense was good last week, obviously, but it's going to require another fantastic performance, and I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't feel very confident. Another area I don't feel necessarily confident, Jesse was talking about this. I asked him to pick X factors on offense and defense, and he went with an interesting one on offense. He went with Will Lutz, the kicker, and he told me off air he knows that picking the kicker is bizarre for an offensive X factor, but he just talked to me about how automatic he's been and the dependability he has represented for this team all season long. And it's just like when the Saints get inside the opponent's 40-yard line, inside the 35, it's like, all right, we know we're getting 3 points right now at the very least. And just knowing Boswell, how good he was last year and how bad he's been this year, we know that we kind of know what that's like, and we also remember it as like a distant memory. And also of note, Thomas Morstead is injured, but will likely play since the Saints never added another punter. So just give me your thoughts on what Jesse was talking about there.
Yeah, so as soon as I listened to that part, I texted you. I was like, wow, must be nice to not worry about getting in the 40-35 and knowing you're going to get points, because obviously the Steelers haven't had that grace this year. Obviously, like you said, it's a distant memory. We saw it last year where you knew when Boswell was getting out there to kick that final kick to win the game, it was happening. Not this year. This year, Boswell comes out and you just kind of hope he doesn't whiff. You hope it doesn't hit the post. And we've just seen it the past couple of weeks, and it's just such a difference that the Saints have here, because the Saints have one of the best kickers in the league right now. And he's from the Ravens tree, of course, because they breeded Justin Tucker, and Will Lutz was with the Ravens. So I just feel like it felt like a shot to me. I know it wasn't, but it hurt me. It hurt me deep down that this is what it used to be like for the Steelers. And the Steelers could be a much better team right now if it's what they had like last year, because they would have won at least one more game with a performance like that. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's a clear disadvantage, and it's a clear disadvantage at punter. Jordan Berry has not played well the last couple weeks, and obviously Thomas Morstead, he hasn't had to punt much this year, but he's been very good when he has. And I just, with all the penalties likely to come on this unit, given the breakdown that we talked about earlier between the home and away team being called. Actually, we didn't talk about that yet. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's likely that there's going to be a lot of special teams penalties again, and I don't feel good about this unit. They got away last week. They had a good week, but I don't know if that's going to happen again. So I guess now I'll get into what I was just talking about. It's worth monitoring. The Steelers have been much better this year when it comes to penalties in the last few weeks. You remember for a while they were dead last in penalties and penalty yardage. They're now up to 24th in the league in penalty yards and are now 18th in total penalties. Craig Worlstad's crew, his crew will be working Sunday's game in New Orleans. He has called 67 penalties on the home team, a full 10% down from the league average on the home team, while calling 106 on the road team. Now, the win percentage for the home team in that instance is only .538, which isn't crazy, but just tell me what you think about that.
It's going to be rough. It's going to be rough when the Steelers' special teams has been really bad this entire year in terms of the penalties. And it's going to be hard. That you can see right now, they have almost a 40 penalty difference between the home and away team this year. So it is good. If it wasn't hard enough having to play against the Saints' offense and defense, the stat is basically saying that the Steelers are going to have to play against the refs too, like they did in the Chargers game. I mean, okay, no, not like that. But like they're going to have a rough time. They're not going to get away with a lot of things. They're not going to. It's going to be hard for them. What do you have to say about it?
It means you can't have pre-snap penalties. You can't shoot yourself in the foot. If you're going to get penalties, at least make sure it's a forced error, if you will. Am I making any sense there? Just if you're going to get penalties called in this game, don't do the stupid stuff like get a false start penalty.
Yeah, no, those can happen. Not at all.
All right, let's move into our X factors right now. Give me both of yours on offense and defense.
For offense, I was originally going to make it Juju, but because Juju's status is up in the air, I'm picking Antonio Brown because if Juju doesn't play, Antonio Brown is going to have to play like he did like last year or 2 years ago, where he was just the guy. He was that dude that had to do everything for the offense. It was just him and Bell. But so I'm going to make my offensive X factor Antonio Brown. For defense, after last week's big game where I don't know if we mentioned it, but he actually won Defensive Player of the Week, Joe Hayden, for last week's performance. He needs to have another one. Yeah, basically, ideally, he's going to shadow Michael Thomas all day and hopefully not lose that battle. But, I mean, I think every cornerback that's versed him this year has basically lost that battle. But I'm going to make him the X Factor because maybe he could change that after having a really good week last week. Who are your X Factors?
I'm going with Jalen Samuels on offense. He had a career day last week. It's going to be a much tougher test this week. The Saints defense is very talented in all aspects, and they're the best in the league against the run. I wouldn't expect Samuels to get more than the 19 carries he had last week. I think it'd be surprising to see him get 15, but we saw him used as a receiver a few times. We know he's good in space. I expect him to get the ball a good amount. I'm really wanting to see how he does in pass protection, though. He gave up a huge sack to the Patriots last week, and he's going to have to be better this week against a far more talented front and one that can definitely get after the opposing quarterback. He is my offensive X factor. On defense, I'm going with Cameron Hayward. I mentioned it before. I really like his matchup with the Saints' banged-up left side of the offensive line. Look, it's going to be really hard to win this game on the defensive side. The Steelers' defensive line is their best part of their defense, and they have a fighting chance against probably the best offensive line in football, certainly one of the top three, and Hayward's matchup is the most favorable. He's going to have to come up big in this one. And as far as keys go, I'll jump right into mine, Austin. On offense, it scored touchdowns early. They need to go up like they did against the Chargers 13-0, like they did against the Falcons 13-0. They got to go up big early. They need to score a touchdown on their opening drive. They need to hope that they get the ball first, too. They need to then get lucky. They need to get a stop on the Saints' first drive and then go down and score again. Like I said, you have to try and make Drew Brees beat you. They're the best play-action team in football, too. I don't think I mentioned that either. Hopefully that takes away the play action if you're up by that much, and hopefully you're just dealing with Drew Brees throwing it to his backs and Michael Thomas, and just you hope that you can stop them there, but you're probably not going to. That's really the only fighting chance I see for the Steelers defense. If the Steelers offense, scores those early touchdowns. And then on defense, it's just try to stop the run, because again, I just talked about how their top weapons are their running backs, and obviously Michael Thomas is their top receiver. You have to do everything you can to try to slow him down. It's probably not going to work, but you have to try. Bracket him and just try to stop the run. Those are my keys to the game for the Steelers.
For me, on offense, it's going to be establishing a run game, just like last week. It wasn't even used as much as it could have been last week, but the Saints are coming into this expecting the Steelers to throw most of the game. So Steelers have to have at least to instill in them some fear that they're going to run here. I think that I feel like the only way the Steelers come out with a W here is if we saw that they ran at least 15 times. For defense, it's unrealistic, but they got to force a turnover. Last week's turnover was basically a miracle, and Drew Brees and crew will not be beat if it's a shootout. Like Jesse said, unless they can force a turnover and change the tide, it's not going to be pretty. So I'm not putting money down on them forcing the turnover, but they're going to need it to win.
Speaking of putting money down, if you're going to be a betting person this weekend, make sure you know the lines between the games right now. Let's get started, Austin. We're wrapping up our pick'em section relatively soon with the NFL season coming to a close shortly. We got a couple more Saturday games. First, we got the Josh Johnson-led Redskins. He got his first career win last week at the hot Tennessee Titans, who are getting 10 points at home. If you're a Steelers fan, you're rooting hard for the Redskins, but I think it's going to be hard for them to beat the Titans at home, like in Tennessee. So give me the Redskins plus 10. I think they'll keep it a little close, but at the end of the day, the Titans are much better.
Yeah, Tennessee has been playing really good the past 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to change that and say that the Redskins keep it within 10 because they've been playing inconsistent all year, so I'm waiting for them to return back to being a shaky team. So Redskins plus 10.
The nightcap is an 8:30 game. Ravens at Chargers. This is a huge game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're rooting super hard for the Chargers. LA -4. If the Ravens win this game, the Steelers will need to win to stay ahead of them. So you're obviously pulling huge for the Chargers here. I think the Chargers are a good team to slow down Lamar Jackson. The Ravens have played some of the worst defenses in NFL history the past few weeks. They're a one-dimensional offense, and yes, I understand it's hard to stop that ground game. But if the Chargers go up by 14 points, this game is over. The Ravens aren't coming back from that. They can't throw the ball, and I know it's a tough defense, but the Chargers have had a few extra days to study this Ravens defense. I think they'll win, and I think they'll win pretty handily.
I'm going to pick the Ravens to win outright because I like the Ravens defense in this matchup. I feel like it's going to be a close game, but I guess it's just the pessimist in me talking, but I think the Ravens win outright here.
Bengals at Browns. The Bengals, who at one point held the AFC North Division lead, are now in the basement, and the Browns can further add to their misery. They're 8.5-point favorites in Cleveland. They can go for the sweep of the Bengals on Sunday. I'll take the Browns, lay the 8.5. They're a much better team, and they're playing like a team that still believes it has a chance to make the playoffs.
Yeah, they are, because they technically do. It's a very long shot, including they need a tie from the Colts and Titans game, but they're still playing like it's possible. I'm going to pick the Browns to cover here because the Bengals are very injured, very bad team. The Bengals aren't even going to have Joe Mixon at full health. We just got it today that he's likely to play, so I don't believe in the Bengals, so I'm going to pick the Browns to cover.
That's very lucky for me because my fantasy team has no healthy players on the bench, so I need Mixon to play. Buccaneers at Cowboys. The Cowboys are getting 7.5 according to USA Today. The Buccaneers are a dumpster fire. I know the Cowboys were disappointing last week, but I kind of expected them to put up a dud. I think they clinched the NFC East on Sunday with a big win.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I think the Cowboys cover here because the Buccaneers, at the end of the day, just aren't a good team. I know we just saw the Cowboys get donutted, but I feel like against the Buccaneers defense, they should be able to put up more points. I feel like the Cowboys cover and, like you said, clinch the NFC East.
Vikings at Lions. Minnesota getting 6 points on the road. Detroit having a rough season. They just lost in Buffalo 14-13. Vikings got on track with a nice win over the Dolphins. I'm still taking the Lions. I will continue to always sell on Kirk Cousins. I think he is. I don't think highly of him whatsoever. I know they're running the ball a lot better now, but I'm not a believer. Never will be.
I'm also not a believer, but I'm going to pick the Vikings to win outright, though, because I still think they're a more talented team. Because right now, Detroit, after losing to the Bills, I just don't like them. But I'm still going to keep them within 6 because the Vikings are underperforming as a team. But I still think Vikings win, just Detroit within 6 points.
And I'll take the Lions to win this one straight up. The New York Giants at the Indianapolis Colts. The Giants got shut out last week. The Colts playing like a possessed team. Their defense has come around. All of a sudden, they look like a complete football team. I think they'll handle the Giants with ease.
Oh, boy. My man, Darius Leonard, about to get, 20 tackles in this. He said 40. But, he's about to, have a Brian Urlacher-like performance where he gets 20 tackles in one game. Colts are going to cover because I think Darius Leonard's just going to do everything. He's going to score every single point.
2018 can't end soon enough for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're 3.5-point dogs in Miami. The Dolphins season pretty much over after their crushing loss last week. Not a whole lot going on in this game. This is one of the few games where there's nothing going on as far as playoff aspirations, but I'll give the Dolphins to cover. The Jaguars are at an all-time low, which we seem to be saying every week, but I don't think you can get lower than losing to a quarterback making his first start in 7 years who has never won.
Yeah, it's pretty low, and because I'm going to pick Miami to cover too. Jacksonville season needs to end.
Yeah, they're in a rough spot to be sure. The Bills looking better as of late. They came away with the win last week over the Lions. They're 13.5-point dogs to the Patriots, who obviously came off that loss to the Steelers last week. Can they beat them this time?
Well, I'm actually going to pick it. I'm going to pick the Bills to win. I don't know why, because at week 3 I said I was never picking the Bills again, and now it's 2 weeks in a row that I'm picking the Bills to win the game. I don't have a good reason. There's no real good reason. I guess it's hope. It's hoping that the Patriots keep losing because it'll make me happy. So I'm going to pick the Bills to win outright, and the Patriots go on a 3-game losing streak.
Austin, let me ask you, you remember the last time the Patriots lost to the Bills at home with Tom Brady at quarterback?
What's it, Ryan Fitzpatrick?
No, you shouldn't remember because it's never happened.
Oh.
Give me the Bills.
I was thinking of one of the few victories the Bills had. I was like, well, the last one I remember was with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm. It was an awesome comeback. But
that one was in Buffalo. That game was in Buffalo. But the Bills, I'll take them plus 13.5. I'm not crazy about the Patriots. The Bills' defense is legit. But, look, they've never beaten the Patriots with Tom Brady in New England. There's no reason that's going to change in this game. The Patriots need a win. Packers at Jets. Aaron Rodgers is going to play a disappointing season for both teams. I'm actually going to take the Jets to win this one outright over the Packers, who are 2.5-point favorites.
I'm going to pick Green Bay to cover. I mean, they're a really bad team, and we just saw the Jets play a really good game against the Texans, but I think Green Bay wins because, I mean, they still got Aaron Rodgers even having a down season. I think they're still going to win. I find it interesting. I'm surprised that they're starting Rodgers when he's still playing with an injury sort of. I feel like they should have shut him down like Cam Newton.
Yeah, there's way too much money invested there for me to want to play him. I would want him sitting for sure. Texans at Eagles. Philadelphia -2 at home. As far as the rest of the NFL is concerned, you want the Texans to win this game. If the Eagles win this game, the Patriots are likely winning their last 2, which means they would jump the Texans for the number 2 seed. And as Jesse Cardinal pointed out to me, the Patriots have won all their Super Bowls when they've had a first-round bye. You absolutely do not want the Patriots with a first-round bye. We know how bad they've been on the road. Having them get to the number 2 seed means there's a good chance they won't have to play a road playoff game, which means they could easily be back in the Super Bowl. The rest of the NFL, sorry, Philadelphia, a lot of the NFL appreciates what you did back in February, but the Texans need to win. So give me the Texans to win. I'm rooting hard for them in this one.
I was surprised that Philadelphia was even favored in this one. I've said this 5 times now, and I think I was wrong every single time, but I get that the Texans just played down to the Jets, but, geez, I thought they still would have been favored over Nick. It's just I'm picking the Texans to win outright, and I feel very confident in that. I'd probably put down money in this game if I had a broker, because I feel like I'd win some money. I'm picking Texans to win outright.
Another game with no playoff implications. Falcons at Panthers. Cam Newton shut down for the year, so the Falcons are favored by 3. I'll take the Falcons to cover.
I'm going to pick Atlanta to cover, too. I don't really... it's kind of a throw-up because you don't know how the backup quarterback in Carolina is going to be, but I'm going to pick Atlanta to cover.
I think it's really quite simple. You've got Matt Ryan, a former MVP, and you've got Taylor Heineke. That's all it really comes down to. It's an ugly game to be sure, though. Rams at Cardinals. According to USA Today, the Rams are a 14.5-point favorite. Look, the Rams have been awful lately, but there's nothing worse in the NFL than the Cardinals' offense. So give me the Rams to cover.
I am actually going to change it to Cardinals plus 14.5. I had the Rams covering with ease, but Todd Gurley is a game-time decision, and I guess that's what I'm basing off. That the Cardinals only lose by 14 because the Rams might not have Todd Gurley. And what's interesting, just signed this week, they said C.J. Anderson is going to be the starter. What? He just got cut by Oakland. I was so surprised when they told me that because I was also being told that I don't even know the backup's name. I think it's Jack Kelly or something Kelsey Kelly, and people were like, "Oh no, he's so good, dude!" Like, and he's gonna be the guy. But now they're like starting C.J. Anderson, so that's interesting. Anyway, I'm gonna pick the Cardinals plus 14.5 on the false hope that Todd Gurley doesn't play.
Bears at 49ers. The Niners getting, or they're +4 right now. The Bears 4 points favorites on the road. This seems kind of deceiving, but then you remember they were only 3-point underdogs to the Seahawks and beat them last week. So I'll take the Bears to cover, but I'm not as confident as I would have been if the line had been bigger, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. I'm going to pick the Bears to cover as well. I feel like it's just a difference of like a very good defense and a not very good defense. The 49ers have only had 2 interceptions on the year. Meanwhile, the Bears lead the league in interceptions. It's a complete opposite in that regard. So I think the Bears cover here.
All right, next game is the Sunday Night Football game. The Chiefs at the Seahawks. This is a huge game for both teams. Kansas City -2.5. I think the Seahawks win this one straight up. They're at home, and the Chiefs are vulnerable.
Yeah, it feels stupid for me with how much I hate on Seattle and with their loss last week, but I'm picking them to win outright. I don't really have a good reason why, but I'm just gonna pick Seattle to win outright.
Snooze fest on Monday night. The Broncos at the Raiders. Denver -3. Give me the Raiders to win and just end this week already.
I'm going to pick Denver to cover. It's a very bad Monday Night Football game.
Might be the worst all year. So let's move into the NFL news, and we've got some stuff to talk about. Pro Bowl rosters have been released. Let's talk about some of the Steelers players that made it. Antonio Brown, obviously, David DeCastro, Alejandro Villanueva, Marquise Pouncey, James Conner, and Cameron Hayward. So what do you think about the Steelers players that made it? And then let's have a little conversation about who didn't make it for Pittsburgh.
I'm very proud of James Conner making it. I mean, obviously those Aaron Donald texts were almost tear-jerking. I don't know if you guys saw that, but Aaron Donald sent James Conner a message right when he was diagnosed with cancer. This was like 4 years ago, and said like, "I'm there for you, and you're gonna make the Pro Bowl when you get there." And James Conner just released those texts to Instagram and stuff, and it's just been like a big news story. But also, what's really great is he's the starter. It's not he was named the starter for the team. 4 of the 6 Steelers are actually starters. All of the offensive linemen that made it, and James Conner, and it's just really good. Just really speaks on what people think of the offensive line. Alejandro Villanueva, you really don't think about him as one of the best ones, but like he has allowed in the league, he has the most snaps without a pressure allowed, like on average. It's just he's done really good. Marquise Pouncey having a really good season and got respected for it. David DeCastro, just he's something else. He might be a Hall of Famer when he's done. We'll see how long he keeps this up because he's at the moment playing out of his mind. But Cameron Hayward was a little iffy on. I didn't think people would have voted for him because I felt like he didn't have the stats, but I felt like the pressure was there, so that I feel like he deserves to be there. But I was surprised that he got the nod based on this being mostly on fan voting. So I guess it's because Steelers have such a big fan base that he was brought in. But like guys like T.J. Watt and Juju Smith-Schuster didn't make it, and I would say those two should have made it in probably before. Not TJ. All right, Juju should have made it, but I don't know. I feel like it was weird Hayward making it without Watt, if that makes sense. What do you think about the Steelers that made it?
I know it's broken up into thirds, and I know that fan voting is 33%, and I forget the other. I know I think it's like players and coaches. They all vote, and it all has a breakdown. So it's not as big, not as largely influenced by fans as we once thought. But as it turns out, I think all these guys are deserving. Villanueva, I thought last year was not as deserving as he is this year. I think this year is by far the best year of his career. He's certainly playing like a Pro Bowler. David DeCastro has been very good. Pouncey has been good. Connor, when he's been healthy, has been good. The problem is he hasn't played the last few weeks. And Hayward, I feel like, is almost a make good for last year because he was certainly good enough last year, but didn't get it. And this year, I feel like he's been solid, about what you normally get from him. So I feel like he's been good. Smith-Schuster was snubbed, if you will, but considering I think they only have 5 wide receivers, I kind of understand why he didn't make it. And then you have Watt, who I understand why he didn't get there, but I think he will eventually. And then as far as the rest of the league goes, there's a handful of snubs. I have a couple, and I know that there's a couple players that you highlighted that shouldn't be there. Tom Brady made the Pro Bowl, and I think I actually have a problem with Andrew Luck not being selected over him. I got another one for you. I think Russell Wilson should be in the Pro Bowl, and Aaron Rodgers should not.
I agree 100%. Aaron Rodgers is having a down year. I mean, he's still playing at a pretty good level, but that's the same thing with Tom Brady. Tom Brady's still playing at a pretty good level, but Andrew Luck's playing at a higher one. Russell Wilson's playing at a higher one. So I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, so I think Luck and Wilson should be in over Brady and Rodgers. You have a couple other players you wanted to highlight.
For snubs, I wanted to say Christian McCaffrey. He was in a tough room. I'll give it to him. He was in a very tough room. And I think the voting ended, I don't know where it ended, but I mean, he's really turned it up the past 3 weeks, and that's probably why he didn't get the extra nod. I feel like he's been better than Elliott, though. I feel like he should be in, and Elliott shouldn't have been. I mean, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, and Ezekiel Elliott are the NFC running backs right now, so it's a pretty good room. But I just think Christian McCaffrey's been playing out of his mind. Another snub I had, Darius Leonard. Oh my God, I had no idea how they didn't put Darius Leonard in there. Darius Leonard leads the league in tackles by 22 tackles, but wait, he missed 2 games with injury, and he leads the league with tackles by 22. 22 tackles. How do you not put that man in there? It's not even like he's not doing anything else. It's not just the tackles. He has interceptions. He has sacks. He has fumbles, forced fumbles, recoveries. That pissed me off. I'm not a fan of the Colts. I don't think I've even watched the Colts game this year, but I've just been really watching Darius Leonard in highlights and stuff, and I see his stats, and they're just insane. And I was mad. If I was a Colts fan, I'd be pissed because when I did vote for the Pro Bowl, I voted Darius Leonard in. I was a little upset. Now, who shouldn't be there? Like I already said, I agree with you. Andrew Luck should be in. Tom Brady shouldn't. I don't understand Melvin Ingram being in there. I think Chris Jones has been playing out of his mind. He just put up 2.5 sacks on the Chargers, and he is second in the league in sacks behind only Aaron Donald. It's just for a defensive lineman. I'm sorry. He has 14.5 sacks. How did he not make the Pro Bowl? I don't understand. He's playing at an elite level. Then another one I took issue with was Tyron Smith. The Cowboys have given up the most sacks in the league right now, and you're going to tell me that I think 2 Cowboys offensive linemen made it. You're going to tell me that all the pressure is coming off from one guy or 2 guys. I don't like that. I think David Bakhtiari from the Packers should have made it there instead. I didn't like Tyron Smith make it when he's part of an offensive line that's just not that good. It's just they're not playing very good this year. But yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, this is why nobody watches the Pro Bowl. I mean, when was the last time you actually watched a Pro Bowl?
I actually watch every year. I'm one of the few people.
Why? Why do you do that to yourself?
I enjoy it. I genuinely enjoy it.
Wow. I was not expecting that. I've watched maybe 2 drives of the Pro Bowl since Alex Mack scored a touchdown 10 years ago.
Boy.
I
forget Alex Mack is that old and has been with the Browns.
I don't know. It bothers me when I see people don't going as hard as they can, but I get it. There's no reason to. There's no incentive for it. I mean, there's a little financial incentive, but it's not worth it. So just at the end of the day, it's a waste of time, especially when you have stuff like this where fan voting is such a big part, even if it's not the only part. All right, so let's move on. Let's segue to John Harbaugh. We talked about earlier in the year how Harbaugh It seemed like his future in Baltimore was in doubt. He had reportedly come to an agreement where he was going to part ways with the team at season's end. Well, now the Ravens have committed to him. They've announced that he's going to be retained through his final year of his contract in 2019, and they intend to extend him as well. I don't know about you, but I think this is a good move for the Ravens. I think he's a fantastic coach, and letting him go would be a colossal mistake.
It's definitely interesting. I feel like it's good to have stability for their young quarterback. So I'm going to say it's a good move as well. I think I don't really know why they were trying to get rid of him in the first place. I mean, like last year they were just riddled with injuries. Like it was terrible for them, and like, it wasn't like they were bad. And now they have a top defense and they're performing well. I don't know. I feel like keeping him was always the good idea, but apparently I don't know why they really wanted to move on in the first place.
Saints head coach Sean Payton lobbied an interesting idea for expanding rosters on game day. This is kind of just a little thing I wanted to ask you quickly. Teams carry 53 players on an active roster, as we know, and they have 46 active that can play in a game on a game day. So what do you think about having all 53 players active on game day, or perhaps expanding the rosters in general? Give me your thoughts on both of those.
Having all 53, that one's an interesting one. I'm going to start with the other question. I think expanding the rosters in general, I like a 55-man roster because it's a nice number. It just ends in 5, so to me, it's nice. And then you get 2 more active players with it. So you get 2 more players allowed on the roster, and you also get 2 more active slots. So you have 48, right? 48 active players in the game now instead of 46. So I feel like that would be the move because you have to do it slowly. It's not gonna be a big jump. I feel like that would be a good start. See what happens. See how it goes from there. Because also, if you have a big jump, you need to expand salary cap a lot. Well, maybe not too much, but because likely the rest of the guys are fringe players, but you're still likely going to have to put up salary cap at least $5 million to account for if you were to say that every new guy got a minimum contract. But regardless, I like that. In terms of making all 53 active, for some reason I don't like that, but I can't come up with a good excuse why. Why don't I like that? I don't know. I want to hear your take on it. Maybe I'll change my mind.
I actually have a very similar approach to you as far as that goes. Now, my reasoning is different. I like the 55-man roster, but that's because when I used to play Madden growing up, all the old games I used to play had 55-man rosters, not 53-man rosters. So all of a sudden, when I got to like Madden 12 or 13, I forget the exact ones, it went down to 53, and all of a sudden, I always had this exactly set way. I always kept the same amount of receivers, tight ends, whatever. I had very little variation. And when I had to cut 2 more players, I was triggered. Like I was not okay. I always kept 2 fullbacks and I had to cut 1, and then I was always mad because I was like, what if my fullback gets hurt and I won't have a true fullback playing? So that always bothered me. And I know the teams won't keep a second fullback most likely when you have just 2 extra players, but I'd be a huge fan of having 2 extra players. I like the idea of having more people employed, more NFL players. I think it's good. You don't want to have a huge roster, but I think it's good to have more. And I like having inactive players for the sake of injury. So that way, if you have a bunch of players injured, they still suit up, but they're not going to play. If you just have them in street clothes, it's the same thing as being inactive. So I like the idea of having some inactive players, but bear with me here. Instead of having 6 players? I think it's 7 players, right?
Yeah, 7.
Instead of having, say you have 53 players, only have 3 inactive players. 1 offense, 1 defense, and 1 primarily a special teams player. What do you think about that?
That's definitely an interesting one. Just have a few more inactive players. I think that's a pretty good idea.
I like the idea of having more, because I always hate it when teams have just 7 active offensive linemen, and it's like, well, what happens when your starting left tackle breaks his leg in the first quarter, and then all of a sudden you've got a backup coming in and he gets hurt, and then it's like, well, now if you have any other injuries that can happen in the fluky game that is football, you're down to a tight end starting at left guard. I don't like that. I want to be able to have more flexibility, and I understand why you don't want to have a ton of players there. I think there should be a little bit more. So I think that's kind of my compromise there. So those are my thoughts on that. Let's move into our bold predictions, though. It's time to wrap up this podcast. Steelers at Saints. It should be a good one, but the Steelers are going to need some big contributions. Give me a couple bold predictions in this one for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
My first one is that Antonio Brown gets 3 touchdowns. My second one is not really that bold, but it's bold for how the Steelers have played, and that's so that the Steelers get a pick in this game. My third one, I don't know why. I keep getting this funny feeling that after both teams have played really well defensively, like the past week, and I mean the Saints have played really well defensively since like November 4th, I feel like the combined points is going to be over 92. So that's my final bold prediction. What are your bold predictions?
Mine are that the Steelers give up no sacks in this game. I think the Steelers are going to have a lot of quick throws, and I don't think Ben Roethlisberger is going to get sacked in this one. That's kind of a bold prediction. I think Cam Hayward has 2 sacks himself. That's definitely a bold prediction. And I have Jalen Samuels scoring 2 touchdowns, 1 through the air and 1 on the ground. So those are my bold predictions. All right, so closing statements, Austin. New Orleans is a 6.5-point favorite at home against the Steelers. It's a big game for both teams. How's it going to go down?
Well, I'm going to stick true to my bold prediction. I have zero confidence in this, but because I made the bold prediction, I'm going to say that the New Orleans Saints win 52-46, and I would put the Steelers plus 6.5 because they would fall within the 6.5. Regardless, my score is wacky. I picked it just to go with my bold prediction, but I do think the Steelers keep it within 6.5. So what is your final score prediction?
I'm going to have the Saints winning 38-20, 38-27. I think the Steelers will put up some points on the Saints defense. They're a really good offense themselves. Unless if the Steelers go up 10-0 or 14-0, I don't see how they can slow down the Saints offense. They need to be able to make them one-dimensional. So I don't see it happening. So I'll take the Saints to win and cover in this one. But I think it'll be an entertaining game, so it'll be tough. But we picked against the Steelers last week. At least we both picked the Patriots to cover. And actually, wait, did you? I think you did, right?
I picked the Patriots to win. Yeah,
to cover. Yeah. So we were both wrong last week. If we're lucky, we'll both be wrong this week. But it'll be tough, but it'll be a good game. Another 4-25 game for the Steelers. Obviously, we hope you all enjoy it, and we hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you have any questions about the show, feel free to email us, strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com, and check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. That'll be listed in our description below. Thank you so much to Jesse Cardinal for joining me on the Stronger Than Steel podcast earlier this week. Always love insight from opposing fans talking about their teams, and it was a pleasure to have him on the show. Austin, thank you so much for joining me again. This will be the Steelers' last road game of the regular season. Went by in a hurry.
Yeah, it's been going too fast. I know I'm going to be really upset when the season comes to a close.
As always, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
Goodbye.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel